In the month of September, Entei will be the quest reward Pokemon in Pokemon Go, replacing Raikou in that big, fancy, at the end of 7 days quest box. Additionally, Moltres will be returning for a 1-day, maybe 2-day event, Moltres Day, where you can get it as a raid boss, much like we had Articuno Day and Zapdos Day. Because these two strong fire types, the best two fire types in the game right now, are coming back to Pokemon Go, you guys might be tempted to spend some rare candy and Stardust on them. Well, if you've been following SwagTips, then you know I'm going to be here to caution you to not waste your Stardust and candy on them, because I feel, with vetted opinions and reasons, that you shouldn't. So this is a clip from my live stream SwagTips where I go over the details on why you should not power up these fire-type Pokemon. Hope you enjoy. These are the counters to Regice, graphed out with the x-axis being total damage output. You could think of that as tankiness. It's basically the percent of damage the Pokemon are doing to the raid boss before they faint. And then on the y-axis here, we have damage per second, which is the average damage per second the Pokemon will deal before they faint. So, not the damage per second they have at every single moment in time, but the average from living to fainting. So this is Regice counters, level 40 simulated against the Regice raid using Frost Breath and Blizzard. No dodging, and I decided to go with Ultra Friends this time since the future is coming. More and more people are getting Ultra Friends. Me, someone who doesn't open and send gifts daily because of reasons I forget. Even I have several Ultra Friends now, so I think a good portion of the population are getting the Ultra Friends on. You'll notice that there are some Gen 4 Pokemon sprinkled in, or Pokemon you might not recognize immediately if you're good at pointing out Pokemon with the Trozes. Yeah, up here in the upper right hand corner we have Heatran, and if you've been following the Swagman, following my Gen 4 analyses, or following the articles on Game Press that talk about Gen 4, then you are already aware that Heatran is a Fire Steel legendary Pokemon, and it is going to be the greatest Fire-type Pokemon, hands down. If you go all the way to the left, yeah, this is how massively tanky it is from over here to the right to all the way to the left. You'll see we got Magmortar, which is, you know, an interesting Fire-type, might have a bit more DPS than Flareon, but that's not confirmed. We don't know that yet. We don't know what moveset Heatran or Magmortar are getting. And then all the way down here we have Infernape, and we don't know what moveset Infernape is getting either. The movesets I used to simulate these Gen 4 Pokemon for Heatran, Fire Spin and Overheat. I think that's reasonable to assume that they might possibly get. Same with Magmortar, and then for Infernape I gave it Counter and Overheat. Counter and Overheat is technically a better moveset against Regice, and it's the moveset that Blaziken is using over here. So I went with the same with Infernape. Infernape is a fighting fire type just like Blaziken, just much glassier, and looks like it's that glassiness is not helping it out in these raids here. And the Charizard, for reference, is the Blast Burn Charizard. I didn't feel like putting two Charizards in when the lesser Charizard would, you know, Blast Burn Charizard's kind of a given at this point. Explaining aside, yeah, you can see quite clearly that Magmortar, looking like a pretty spicy fire type. Don't be too fooled about its performance compared to Moltres. This is specifically against Blizzard, so Moltres takes neutral damage from Blizzard. Magmortar and Entei here, and Flareon and Blaziken and Infernape for that matter, they all resist the ice type attack. They all resist it because they don't have the flying typing taking away that resistance. And interesting thing about Heatran, more than being a legendary Pokemon with fat stats, is that being a fire and steel type, give it a doubled up immunity to resistance to ice type damage. It has resistance to ice with steel and resistance to ice with fire. Now you might be thinking, well, Ryan Swag, well, what about using these fire types against grass type Pokemon? Well, Heatran, metal, steel type, that also resists grass. So you're also getting a double resistance there. Well, what about bug type Pokemon? Steel also resists bug. So Heatran is making some headway in those fights too. So yeah, a lot of types that fire types are specific to countering and actually do a better job of countering than other types of Pokemon. Heatran's got that like doubly covered. It has huge attack and it resists. So the only thing that could really cripple it a little bit is if it got a really poor moveset. But Heatran is the embodiment of volcanoes, so I can only imagine that it'll get a halfway decent one. But Fire Spin and Overheat here, pretty reasonable run-of-the-mill fire type moveset for the Heatran. So moving on from this graph, this is Gen 4. Well, Well, another layer of reasonable future prediction that we can rope into this is the Fire-type starters getting Blast Burn. We haven't had a second starter of same type Community Day yet. What I'm saying is we had Bulbasaur, Squirtle, and Charmander, and that's grass, water, and fire, but we haven't had a Gen 2 version yet, and we are going to be seeing the Gen 2 version with Chikorita. That will be September's Community Day. So when that September Community Day rolls on in, and we see what the exclusive move is for Meganium, they'll be pretty telling for what the future of other starter Pokemon look like. If they give Meganium a whole new attack and not Frenzy Plant, then that would suggest that the other starters will get new attacks instead of Hydro Cannon or Blast Burn. So that will be a pretty good telling point. But at this moment in time, I think it's reasonable to assume that Fire-type starters will get Blast Burn when their Community Day comes, so decided to plot out some sims on that. So this is the same raid, same Pokemon, except I gave Blast Burn to all of the starters. You'll see that Blaziken shows up twice, and this is the Overheat Blaziken. This one that says Blast Burn, that is the Blast Burn Blaziken. So what's interesting about this graph is that Blaziken, with Blast Burn, gets to a performance level that is on par with, actually slightly higher than Machamp's. So Blast Burn Blaziken will be pretty dang awesome. Looks like Blast Burn Typhlosion really isn't helping it out too much. It's making it on par with Flareon, which is interesting because it has, a 2-bar charge move with Blast Burn versus the 1-bar Overheat. Flareon could use Flamethrower, but Flamethrower is a much less good attack than Overheat is overall. You look at all aspects of it. So Typhlosion could make a pretty decent ult, but Charizard with Blast Burn is better, and it's not even getting the full resistance that Typhlosion is in this raid, so kind of telling. And then similar with Infernape, not too hot. So overall, the Blast Burn starters definitely do creep on Moltres and Entei, giving credence to not powering them up. I mean, Charizard's already right behind them, but then you look back over and you're like Gen 4. So not only are there not any relevant raids to use fire types in really in the foreseeable future, all things considered, aside from Regice, Registeel, and Articuno raids. So yeah, aside from those, there aren't really any big pressing reasons for fire-type Pokemon. So until we get Heatran, you really won't even need to power it up anyways. And when we get Heatran, you might not even really need to power up Heatran anyways, so stuff to consider when it comes to these fire-type Pokemon. Now, there is a cool, interesting thing that comes up every now and then. You got the signature moves of legendary Pokemon, always on our minds when we remember that that's a thing. Entei has the same signature move as Ho-Oh, or I guess more reasonably, it shares it, or it kind of took it. Ho-Oh's signature move is Sacred Fire. Alright, let's stop beating around the bush. And Entei can also learn Sacred Fire in the main series games. Now, there is no programmed Sacred Fire in the Game Master, so for the purposes of predictive content and judging how things may be in the future, I decided to clone Origin Pulse, which is the Big Daddy OP Kyogre signature move, water type attack that is in the Game Master, and I just made it a fire type attack, and I gave it to Entei and Ho-Oh. So using the Sacred Fire, which I used as an Origin Pulse clone, I'm not saying that Ho-Oh or Entei are going to get Sacred Fire. I don't know what the stats actually look like. Predictive content for the sake of judging what these fire types are going to look like in the future. It doesn't seem to change a whole heck of a lot for Entei. I mean, it is a pretty solid DPS boost. It is a solid DPS boost for Entei. 0.7, 0.8 DPS. Relatively against the Regice fight, which is kind of solid if you consider the fact that it's Regice and Regice has massive defenses. So against the softer raid boss, it would be a really large gain for Entei, and this gain would put it on the level of, the Blast Burn chicken here, Blaziken. Once again, this is Fire Spin Overheat Heatran, still not on the level of Heatran. Heatran still has way more resistances, and that DPS is poppin'. That DPS is fly. A cool thing also is that Sacred Fire fixes Ho-Oh's DPS a bit, but it still keeps it below all the other fire types. Ho-Oh still has its huge bulk and its great resistances and its unique coverage, but a better fire type charge move doesn't really seem to be doing it much favors. To add to this, there are some thoughts out there like, what if Sacred Fire is a fast move, and then Ho-Oh could have a good fast move and then Fire Blast, and it'll have the dual stab and it'll finally be good. Well, this is using Steel Wing, and Steel Wing is super effective against Regice, and Steel Wing is actually one of the best fast moves in the game, in spite of its, steel typing, which is relatively poor coverage. But that's like basically everything going for Ho-Oh here. OP supercharge move, really great super effective damage on the raid boss, and it's still relatively subpar. It's good, but it's not great. So yeah, I don't see Sacred Fire really fixing the situation. It'll definitely make Entei a lot better, and Ho-Oh a lot better for what that's worth. But at the end of the day, that Heatran is just staring them down in the upper right. You might forget about it because it's in the upper right. Heatran, that pressure in the future. Fire Spin Overheat. We do not have a Game Master. We do not know what moves Heatran's going to get, but if it does get the bread and butter, simple, Fire Spin Overheat set, then it'll be pretty jammin'. Super effective damage. Yeah, so this is Frost Breath and Blizzard. Attacks that really showcase Heatran's great resistances. However, if you remember from some previous content I did, a Question of the Week video on my YouTube channel, where I was looking at the counter types and counter Pokemon to the future Gen 4 raid bosses, Heatran has a doubled up weakness to ground type attacks. So Fire, weak to ground, Steel, weak to ground. So Heatran, very, very weak to ground. Think about Dragonite and Rayquaza and how they're weak to ice type attacks. That's Heatran versus ground type attacks. Regice, if you recall, I know it's been a couple months, but Regice has Earthquake. It has a ground type attack. So this fight is kind of highlighting Heatran's strengths. What does Heatran look like in its worst case scenario against a raid boss that it should be supreme against? Well, I graphed that out so we can check that out. And just to keep things consistent, I kept the Blast Burn and the Sacred Fire Sims on just to keep all this content relative and building. And small error on this graph, I say Frost Breath Earthquake, so FBEQ. This is actually with Rock Smash, so my mistake. So stacking the deck even harder against Heatran because Steel type is weak to fighting. So a lot of weaknesses coming at Heatran. So this is Heatran's worst case scenario against Regice. And you can see that in this fight, Heatran goes from being the Pimp God Mega Swag King to being as good as everyone else, just a general solid fire type Pokemon. You'll see that Moltres is doing better, and that's because Moltres resists the ground type attack. Flying has a doubled up resistance to ground type because it's a special flying type double resistance, sort of like how ghost types doubly resist fighting type attacks. Moltres has that going on with its flying type, but the fire type is weak to ground, so it cancels out the double, making Moltres just regularly resisting ground type. But because of that resistance, Moltres will last longer and will do more damage to Regice before going down. Much the same with Ho-Oh over here, down in the lower right hand corner. For Ho-Oh, this is like a super tank kind of option where it's taking a lot of hits because it's got the huge defense stats. But even with the OP Sacred Fire simulated made up attack that I made up for Ho-Oh, copying Origin Pulse and making it fire, not doing a whole lot of favors for Ho-Oh. Like, it's excellent, pretty solid DPS, and it's going to last the fight long, but, the other fire types, higher DPS, less TDO, but is that really going to matter in practice? Depends on how much you like Ho-Oh. Maybe you got the Hundo shiny one, right? So that could be a pretty good justification for powering up and using Ho-Oh. Kind of recommend it depending on circumstances. Let's not get into that whole debate tonight. But yeah, Moltres here definitely doing better. Definitely makes it an ace in the hole DPS for the resisted hits. But if you look over here, if you were considering like an Entei to power up, well, Heatran is still as good. And this is in the fight that Heatran is most weak to. So the Focus Blast set, Heatran is only singly weak to it, not doubly weak, so the TDO would presumably increase. And then when you have attacks that Heatran resists, and when it comes to Fire-type Pokemon that it's competing with, Heatran is most likely going to double resist those hits, well then it's doing like God-tier, mega crazy, legendary Pokemon better. Just some things to keep in mind when it comes to Ho-Oh and Moltres. That was a clip from my live stream SwagTips. SwagTips now streams every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Time on the Twitch channel SwagTips. If you got any questions on this content and would like them answered, then comment below, let me know what's up. And if you enjoy this content and you want to see more like it, well then make sure to subscribe to SwagTips. Thanks for watching. I just gotta whisper SwagTips and I'm done, so just SwagTips. And a special shout out to these patron supporters. I am about halfway to my goal for having a video editor for my weekly live streams. If you'd like to support the Swagman, head over to Patreon/SwagTips.